Alright, welcome back to the channel. It has been quite a while since I've made a proper video and this is going to be a long one. I'm going to be talking about this PC for 20 minutes or probably more. So if that's not your thing, there's plenty of other videos on my channel, something for everyone on here. So feel free to go and check one of those out instead. So I'll start with a little bit of history. My introduction to PCs was quite late. I didn't get into PCs until 1999, which is quite late by comparison. So from about 2001 to 2005, that is my prime era for PCs. I was really into PCs. I was buying and selling them. I was building them. Yeah, that's my era. So I had been watching lots of PC videos on YouTube, as you do, and it put me really in the mood to build something. So I wanted to build something around from that era, 2001 to 2005, and I first asked my friends, all my personal friends, if anyone had something lying about that they no longer needed or wanted. And one of my friends had this machine lying in the attic. When I got this, it was non-functioning. He had let his teenage son play about with it, practicing building, and obviously he had no idea what he was doing. He had cut all the wires to the power supply that go to the main connector on the power supply. For some reason he had snipped all those wires. He'd snipped the wires going to the CPU fan, and it turns out he had actually bent a pin on the processor. So I soldered all the wires back together, got it all, functioning, got all the voltages checked and all, and checked the processor. That pin, when I tried to straighten the bent pin, it snapped off. So I then decided to try and solder the leg of a resistor on where the pin had snapped off, which worked a treat. Soldered the pin on, snipped it to length, put it back into this motherboard, and the computer powered up, no problem. So that was grand. I had spent about a week setting this up, getting XP installed and putting all my favourite games and apps on that I remember from back in the day. And I had installed Doom 3, and on the first play of Doom 3, as soon as I got to the intro movie, the computer just turned off, just went blink and turned off and wouldn't turn back on again. So I done all the usual steps, the troubleshooting steps, changed the RAM, tried powering it with nothing plugged into the motherboard, etc, etc. And I came to the conclusion that it was the CPU had died, which I know is very uncommon. It was either the CPU, the motherboard, or the power supply. So looking on eBay, buying a replacement CPU was the cheapest option. It cost £8. I had to buy it from Germany. It was the cheapest one. So I bought the CPU. It took about a week to arrive. Popped it into the machine and it powered straight up. So yeah, the CPU had died. So the specs on this thing, the processor is an Athlon 2600 Plus. It's running at 2.18 gig, I think. The motherboard is a Gigabyte 7VA XP Ultra. It has 2 gig of RAM. It's unbranded RAM, but it has a free memory slot left, so I can upgrade it to 3 gig. The graphics card is 7800 GS. That's AGP 8X, and that's pretty much the strongest part of this. I've been testing it, running loads of games on it, and the CPU seems to be the sort of bottleneck. The good old XP pipes. Yeah, so the graphics card is sort of the best part of this machine, but it's perfect now for what I wanted to build. It's absolutely perfect. It has the same processor as a PC that I built back in 2003 or 4, I think. So it's around about the same spec as that big machine that I built. That was my pride and joy back then. So it has two hard drives in it. There's a 260 gig main hard drive, and I stuck a little 40 gig, I think 40 or 60 gig hard drive in as a backup, just to store some extra stuff on. So you can see there the branding on this case is E-Star, and I think this is the case that my mate's PC was originally built in, and he just sort of upgraded it over the years, kept the same case. So yeah, it's a budget case. This is a little fan speed controller that I put in. Hopefully you'll be able to hear this on the microphone here. So that is what the fans, that's the CPU fan. That's what it sounded like all the time, which is why I put the speed controller on it. I've put a little card reader in the front of it here, although it's, I think I've used it once since I put it in there. I do have a floppy drive that I need to put into it as well. It has a DVD ROM and a CD reader. So yeah, I need to get a good working CD. I need to get a good working DVD re-reader to replace just the ROM that's in it. So here's a bit of a look inside the case. As you can see, I have made absolutely no attempt at cable management because with the IDE cables there's really not much point. So the CPU cooler has two fans on it, which is why it's so loud when it's turned up. I have ordered a silent fan to replace the one in the power supply, because that's where any noise comes from this thing, is that fan running flat out in the power supply. So I'm still waiting on them being delivered in the post. So I have all my favourite games installed up until sort of Half-Life 2. It runs Half-Life 2 absolutely perfectly, rock solid at 60 frames a second. I put Oblivion on it and it runs Oblivion at about 15 frames a second, and that's with everything turned down. And I was using the MSI Afterburner to check the frame rates and CPU, GPU usage, and it's the CPU is sitting bang on 100% all the time. The GPU is only being utilised about 60%. So the CPU is the limiting factor in this build, but the motherboard that's in it can take up to 3000, an Athlon 3000 plus. So I hope to upgrade that at some stage. I don't know how much more of a difference it's going to make. If you look at the minimum specs on Oblivion, it asks for a 3 gig Pentium 4. So I don't know if even upgrading that will be enough to play Oblivion at a reasonable frame rate. But I'm not that worried. I can play Oblivion on my main PC. That's fine. And for anyone who's asking, can it run Crysis? Yes, but just about.
To my back, no matter.
So there you are. It does run Crysis. It's at 24 frames per second at the minute, and that's basically nothing happening. So the CPU usage, hopefully you can see that at the top left of the screen there. It says CPU 100%, GPU is around about 60-65%. I'm using a 1.5 gigs of RAM and 128 megabytes of video RAM. Not sure if that's correct or not, to be honest. Seems very low. But this is with all the graphics turned down, as low as they'll go on Crysis. And I'm getting, there's 16 frames a second now.
Area looks. Move in on that trailer. Tell just snipers and armored patrols up ahead.
You can see the graphics popping in as you approach them here.
I'll take the high ground. Confirm when you're inside the village.
11 frames a second.
Guy behind that massacre a few years back. Why would he be here?
I don't know.
So it does run Crisis very poorly. It's pretty much the same with Oblivion as well. It's so slow and laggy, it's pretty much impossible to hit anyone in combat. So there you go, guys. That's just a look around this XP system that I have spent the past sort of 3 weeks messing with, getting it all up and running, replacing numerous parts, troubleshooting. It's been absolute blast. So if you have any questions or want to see something specific about this machine, drop a comment down below and I'll be more than happy to oblige. Thanks for watching, guys, and I'll catch you in the next video.